What's happening, guys and girls? Acrinator here, and welcome to the 28th episode of the Counting Pixelated Sheep podcast for the month of December 2017, also the last podcast of 2017, obviously. I am joined, as always, by my partner in crime and co-host for this show, Sirjohnmac
I. Hey.
And today we're going to do something a little bit different. I remember last month I opened up the floor to anyone who had any suggestions for additions to sections for the podcast, and while we didn't have any common suggestions, I came up with 4 different possible things that we can do. So we're still doing the 2 articles, but we're going to attempt to minimize the reliance on the rambling section so there's more order and organization to this. So the 4 sections, before I get into like what we have, the 4 new sections would be, and we're not going to necessarily do all of these every single month, but they are a YouTube channel showcase, so it's something of like a critique as well as a sort of a shout out, but I think given this channel size, more of a critique, constructive criticism, all that. Channels that either of us think are really good, less than 25,000 subs, I think it was 20 or 25,000, I think it was 25, and say like, what we think they can improve upon, something, this or that, because if they're any larger than that, then they probably already know what they're doing, but if they're any smaller than that, there's plenty of channels that are successful, obviously, because they have, possibly a couple thousand subs, but might need, helping hand in one direction or another in terms of like, outside criticism. Then there's also the free-to-play game showcase. There's plenty of free-to-play games, whether it be on like, say, mobile or Steam or whatnot, that many people overlook. Then there is the previous month, what is it? What did I write? Previous month comment response. That's what it was. I can't read my own handwriting. So like that I don't think we'll get to do unless like this podcast ever gets an active viewership, I guess, in terms of like if there was ever certain comments that like we would prefer to answer in the next podcast as opposed to just writing it in the comment section itself. And then the last section is the Where Are They Now section, which is basically looking back at an article that we touched upon in like a previous podcast at any date and time, and looking at like where that company, where that game, where that whatever is right now. I think the only time we've ever really done that officially in the past is with Pokemon Go, because we sort of followed that game throughout its development from like just getting announced to be developed all the way through like its death. But there's plenty of other stuff that in the past we've always been like, and if we'll keep you updated, and we never really did. But then again, there was nothing immensely important to share, but I figure it might be interesting. So what we have for you today, the 2 articles are AAA Development Costs and Civilization 6 iPad port. We have a channel showcase, which we'll get to that later. And then we also have a Where Are They Now section. So, that being said, let's dive straight into the first article, which was AAA Development Costs. This was actually a really, really interesting article by IGN, Elena Pierce. That name sounds familiar. Either way, this article was actually really well written, and it was basically bringing up the discussion that I think a few others like Jim Sterling have already talked about, where like, microtransactions are significant in games because, they AAA titles need microtransactions, like Overwatch, like Battlefront 2, where they need these microtransaction costs on basically a lottery system in order to stem the costs of development, because basically AAA development has stayed at $60 per game since, I believe, the 80s? If not the 90s. Whereas, obviously, the development costs have risen with inflation and all that, but the cost for the game itself isn't. And I believe the author, it's a relatively long article, but it's a good article. I read through it, and the author is basically saying, like, here's a bunch of reasons why they shouldn't be more than $60 and why microtransactions don't necessarily have to be in the game. And I thought it was a really well-written article. You had something to say, John?
I think there actually were some games, I think for like the N64, like Turok, I think that was actually over $60.
Yeah.
And that was a while ago.
Yeah, that was like, what, early 90s?
I think so.
That's probably older than us. But yeah, it's basically my take on this is that $60, like, people are getting fatigued out of paying $60 for these games, let alone paying, $70, $80, $90. Like, I didn't even pay $60 for Overwatch. I didn't buy the Origins edition or whatever. I bought the base edition, which was $40, which is still a lot of money, but it's a Blizzard game. I knew I was going to be playing it a shit ton. Actually, more recently, I've been almost exclusively playing that, but that, like, a lot of people are like, well, why can't it be $30? Why can't it be this? And the answer really is that there is no reason that it has to be $60. Like, really, what these big companies like EA, like, I don't know, Rockstar, because they mentioned GTA Online and all that, or even like Activision, because I'm sure they'd love to raise the price if they could get away with it. But what they need to figure out is how to keep games at $60 or less, depending on what kind of game you're offering, and lower the cost of development, while still making a quality product. That's on the company. That is not the consumer's issue. That is not our problem. And as a consumer, the only way you can really, and this, actually, I'll get to this point later on towards the end of this podcast, but the only way that you can speak as a consumer is with your wallet. You can either buy something or you don't. And if you think $60 is too much, don't buy it. Simple as that. And these game developers then can't bitch and complain, oh, well, no one's buying our $60 game. As a consumer, the fine line is like, you can't say, well, I would want to pay $20 for this. It's like, the developers, or I guess anyone making a product, can listen to you, obviously. But
Dang it.
But, I think... Where was I? Sorry, the dog interrupted. Lost my train of thought. Right, so the developers or anyone selling a product can listen to you, or they don't have to necessarily as well, because it's their product to sell. They can set it at whatever price they want, but then it's also the consumer's option and their right to decide whether to buy that product or service or not. And I think people not willing to pay, even $60 nowadays, like I said, for most games, is a sign that devs and particularly the companies behind them need to get smarter at their management. Basically, it's a management issue. They need to budget better. They need to be smarter. Maybe, I think maybe pay the devs a bit more, but figure out how to do that in the middle. But yeah, I think it's kind of funny to hear, like, devs. I think it was it Ubisoft? Someone at Ubisoft that was like, oh, well, you're just lucky that, they're $60. Microtransactions are just the extra costs. It's like, yeah, sure. Good luck selling games with that mentality.
Yeah, I mean, that would be Ubisoft.
Yeah, it was either them or EA. It might have been EA about Battlefront, I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't say so in the article, I'm just going off of what I remember hearing a few months back. But it was one of those, those are the really only two big companies that would be dumb enough to say something like that to the public. As much as I love Blizzard, I know damn well that they're, one of the larger companies in the world, and they would love to make a quick buck off of people as well. They're just going to stay quiet about it.
Yeah. Yeah, the kind of unsettling trend towards, like, microtransactions, especially in, like, single-player games, because you don't need servers for that.
Yeah, right? It's like,
except for the microtransaction stuff.
It's like I can sort of see, like, the microtransactions and mostly... Well, personally, I don't care about microtransactions as long as they're cosmetic. Like, the line for me is drawn where someone can have an actual gameplay advantage. If someone wants to pay $40 to get 50 loot boxes in Overwatch to get the Winston Yeti skin, that I wish I could get, but I haven't gotten yet. It's like, that doesn't really put them ahead of me in any way. And it's like, yes, they might look cooler than me, but as long as, we have the same potential as Winston. Like, he doesn't get, extra damage on his Tesla cannon or extra jump height. I'm fine with whatever. That's really on the individual consumer.
And oh god, like, this kind of transitions into just talking about loot boxes and all the, like, gambling stuff with that.
Yeah, but we're gonna get to that later. Because
Right.
the look back, which
Yeah.
we'll get there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely understand games having, like, some small microtransaction thing to, like... I mean, games used to do this back in the day with DLC. And that was supposed to be to help maintain servers and stuff like that.
Yeah. And even before that, subscription. Nowadays, the only games that can really get away with subscriptions are like WoW and Final Fantasy XIV. That's because they sort of started before the whole movement to get away from that.
Yeah.
And even those people are, it's kind of hard to argue once again because the company can sell it for however much they want. And I mean, hell, those are by far the two most popular MMOs in the world right now, but yeah.
Yeah.
The thing I find funny is that all the companies that you hear being extremely vocal about this topic of like, oh, we need microtransactions to stem the cost of development are like these huge companies.
Yeah.
It's like, where is it? EA made over $800 million in 2016. And you're telling me that you need, fucking Battlefront 2 microtransactions as egregious as they are? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, maybe if, like, Psyonix for Rocket League, but even Rocket League is, like, that blew the hell up. So, I'm sure they're fine, too. But you don't hear them. They're not this, like, massive company. They have, like, 50 or so employees? I think. I saw a documentary on them, and they had, like, a relatively large development company, but it wasn't, like, floors upon floors of developers. But even so, you don't hear, like, Psyonix complaining, oh, well, we need this or that to deal with, the cost of keeping the Rocket League servers up. No, they just do it. They keep on trucking. They're obviously making a profit, otherwise the game wouldn't be around. They'd be dead.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it's almost a self-propagating thing because...
Oh, absolutely.
Like, EA and Ubisoft are going to be making, like, Battlefield and generic Ubisoft game number 58. Like, Watch Dogs or Assassin's Creed or The Crew or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's all this very, like, predictable, safe, by-the-book stuff, which doesn't really excite anyone except for, like, a specific user base. And that's all fine and good, but, like, to then say that user base isn't making enough money and try to milk them for all they got.
Yeah, well,
it's like you're driving them away.
This article actually has a list of the top 10 selling video games, both retail and digital, for this past November. Let me blow it up on my phone a little bit. So number 1 is Call of Duty World War II, obviously by Activision Blizzard. Number 2 was Battlefront 2, Star Wars. Number 3 is Assassin's Creed, NBA 2K, Madden NFL, Mario Odyssey, FIFA, Need for Speed, Destiny, and Pokemon. Like, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's literally half of the list by the two companies, EA and Ubisoft, that are complaining the most, have like the top 10 sales,
Yeah.
And this is obviously on all platforms. So it's like, what are you complaining about? Like, I get it that like they probably spend a lot of money, but again, that's for their internal budgeting. That's for their accountants to worry about. That's not for them to bitch and moan to the consumer. Oh, you need to buy loot boxes. You need to do this and that. It's like, how about you just be smarter with your money? If you're like, I doubt they're actually doing that bad. I'm sure they're so far in the black financially that they're perfectly fine, and they will be for many years to come. but like, why do you have to complain to the consumer? Like, complain internally. We don't have to hear that because we can't help you. You're not getting, at least from people like me, and I assume John as well, because I don't hear about your escapades of buying 40 loot boxes in like Overwatch or some shit. That, you know, like, people like us, you're not getting any pity purchases from us. You know?
Yeah, where can I donate to the EA Relief Fund?
Yeah, right. Oh, here it is. Actually, it's towards the beginning of the article. It's like a tweet by Luke Plunkett, which I have no idea who the fuck that is. I'm assuming it's someone at one of these companies. It's like, what if loot boxes and microtransactions were the only way publishers could afford to keep selling new video games that cost $50 instead of $90 because AAA dev costs are out of control? And the part that I think that I hone on in there is costs are out of control. It's like, then get them under control. That's not our problem that you're incapable of managing your budget. You know?
Yeah, that... And, I mean, even this is kind of disingenuous because of all the, like, deluxe editions that are $80 and, like,
oh yeah,
ultimate editions, which are $140 and have, like, a $5 little resin model of Ezio or something like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It doesn't feel good.
No, and of course there's going to be people who buy that, and, you know, if they want to buy it, more power to them. But, you know, normal people are probably just going to buy the normal package, you know? I mean, like, hell, yeah. I love Blizzard, but I wasn't buying the extra $20 for, like, some random shit for the Overwatch Origins edition, or I guess now it's the Game of the Year edition. It's like, I'm not paying an extra $20 for that, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, maybe, I think it was like you got a Winston pet in WoW, you got something in Diablo, I think it was like a banner. And it's like, maybe the selling point for me would have been if instead of a Winston pet, you got like some sort of mount. Not a Winston mount, but like a mount based off of Overwatch. You know, then I probably would have gone out of my way to pay the extra $20 because it's like, I play WoW a lot, you know, I'll play Diablo a lot, whatever. But I know you did get a mount in like Heroes of the Storm based off of Overwatch, but I was like, I don't play Heroes, I don't like MOBAs. Like, give me a WoW mount. Either way, though, I think that's all I really have for this article. It's pretty obvious what is right and what is wrong. So I guess we can move on to the second article, which is the Civ 6. This one actually caught my eye just by reading the title of the article. Civilization 6 comes to iPad full game to cost $60. It's like, first off, Civilization, those are big games. You know, those are like, what, 40 gigabytes, I think? I have Civ 5, which John gifted me because he had an extra one through like Humble Bundle, but...
I actually have Civ 6 installed, and it is 8 gigabytes.
Oh, really? I thought it was much larger.
No, they're actually not huge.
No. Well, either way, that's still $60 for an iPad game, which is going to turn some heads. I wonder how many sales they're actually going to have, because according to the article, they are like taking a massive amount of effort to optimize it and like lessen the size and everything. Yeah, it's going to be 3.14 gigabytes. You can play, and actually you can play the first 60 turns for free, and then the rest of the game is, you know, $60. It looks like for the first 2 weeks, which is going to be like January 4th. Yeah, January 4th. You can actually buy it half off for $30 instead of $50 or $59.99. You know what I mean? Which actually, that's a pretty good deal, because it's going to be, according to the devs, the full game with just some adjustments to how it consumes power, how it displays like battery left and stuff like that. So it's going to have like, it's going to be a full AAA game, but on the iPad, which, to my knowledge, this might be the first one like that. Or at least first successful, potentially. I've never really heard of a Civilization controversy of this sort, so I'd imagine they'd probably do it pretty well, you know? Because it is like the actual developers. They're not even like porting it out to some other company to port it to iPad. It appears like they're actually doing it themselves, which if anyone's going to do it right, it's going to be them.
Yeah. This is really interesting because the last like kind of AAA mobile release, like a port of a AAA game, I remember is XCOM, and that released at like $20.
Yeah, right.
And it apparently, from what I'm reading it, that actually sold pretty dang well. But I'm really curious to see how it's going to sell at $60.
Yeah, and my question is, like, for the people who, like, who's going to have time on their iPad to play Civ, you know? Like, the majority, I could imagine the majority of time that people would have would be, like, at home, and if that's the case, why not just play it on the computer then? You know, it's like, maybe, I guess, people who, like, you know, take the train into, like, New York City or something, you know, where that's like an hour-long train ride. But even so, I feel like Civ 6, if you really want to get into it, and if you're not playing the free version where it limits you to 60 turns, like, it takes a lot longer than that, you know, like, and I can imagine this would require internet connection. I mean, maybe not, but I don't know.
I mean, if it is just like the base version of the game without, and you're like not playing multiplayer, then I don't see why it would have to be always online. Then
I guess you could probably bring it on like a plane. You know, if you're going like across the country from like East Coast to West Coast, that's like a 3-hour plane ride. So I guess then, but even so, it's like, it's sort of the question of who would pay for this and who would also play it, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, this may be a contentious opinion, but honestly, Civ 6, it like isn't even $60 most of the time on the Steam store.
Yeah.
And in the state that it's in right now, I don't think it's worth $60 personally. And that's another like vote with your wallet thing. But I can't see this being extremely successful. Again, we'll see.
Yeah. Actually, I think I remember earlier this year, or whenever Civ 6 came out, I think didn't Total Biscuit make a video saying here's some issues that the game has? Like, I could have sworn he made a video like that. I don't quite remember, though. I don't really follow Civilization. Those aren't the kind of games that I go out of my way to play. I don't mind games with strategy, but strategy games are a bit above my head. It's too much thinking for not enough fun. It's kind of why I like City Skylines, because it's sort of like that. It has the aspect of like building stuff from the ground up, but you can just sort of fuck around and, you know, use cheats and have like infinite money and be like, what would happen if?
Yeah.
Fucking tsunami. Oh look, the dam disappeared. That sort of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, and I think this is definitely one that like maybe a year down the line we could do for the Where Are They Now segment. But
yeah,
that's all I really have for this.
Yeah, I mean, same. It's not really that much to talk about with this.
Yeah, well, we did talk about it for like, what, 5, 6, 7 minutes, something like that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
6 minutes. Close enough. Plus, we still have 2 more sections to get to, so...
Right.
So let's move on to the YouTuber showcase thing. Now, this channel is actually very interesting. I've recently gotten into them, mostly because I've been getting into the Overwatch League a bit, because I've never really been big into like sports or even esports for that matter. I'd rather like play the sport or even play the game. But I figured I might as well check it out. And obviously, since we're from the Northeast, I've been rooting for Boston Uprising, although we are technically equal distance to Boston and New York, but I prefer Boston. It's a friendlier city, if you've ever been there. Plus, there's a lot more history to it. New York's just like everyone's like, fuck off. Boston, you go to like with the Red Sox paraphernalia, they're like, hey, family, so that's nice. Anyways, this channel is actually very interesting because I think he has a very, very unique perspective on the Overwatch League and the Overwatch competitive scene in general. The channel's name is KINGmykL. It's Michael is spelled MYKL, so originally I thought it was MyKill, as in like, you know, gaming. But apparently it's Michael, because I've watched a decent amount of his videos as of late. He seems to be, for all I know, he could be younger than, you know, John and I were like 22. He could definitely be younger than that. And he's actually a professional Overwatch player, at least part-time, from what I can tell. He runs/is on the team KINGmykL, which is actually a team that I had heard of before finding him. And I think because of his perspective, he knows like a lot of these people in like the Overwatch League. He's, you know, played with XQCs, played with Defran, I think, or played against them rather. He obviously there were plenty of people who are in the Overwatch League now that are were in KINGmykL or / still are. I'm not entirely sure the status of that team. Nor am I sure how the Overwatch League entirely works, but I think he has a very unique perspective because he knows a lot of these people personally. He's, you know, played against them, he's played with them, he's a pro himself. I believe he's top 500. I wouldn't be surprised. I've seen his gameplay on his channel, and he's, you know, just like random gameplay footage up there, and he's like, you know, top 500 or GM or whatever, so definitely playing with those people. So I think he has a very unique perspective. Obviously, anyone and everyone can talk about the Overwatch League, but he has sort of an insider's perspective. If not, you know, he's not in the Overwatch League himself, but I think he has the potential to be one of the best channels to talk about professional Overwatch, because a lot of these channels were like, I think a lot of them, they don't really say their rank. I think the highest ranked person I watch somewhat regularly for like Overwatch that happens to also talk about professionals would be like Unit Lost Stylosa, because he is like mid to low GM from what I can tell, you know. But this guy, King or Michael or whatever is, he goes by in terms of in-game, you know, he's definitely the next tier up from like Stylosa in terms of in-game skill. So I think he has the potential to. Have you checked out the channel at all, John? I know I sent you the link.
I've watched a couple of his videos. Yeah, I mean, he definitely seems good. It's kind of weird because I play a lot more than I watch like Overwatch League and stuff like that, so I don't know a whole lot about the whole inside baseball of it. But it still managed to like hold my attention, definitely. Yeah,
actually I'm pretty confused about the inside workings of the Overwatch League too, because like I noticed, at least for the preseason, it seems like I don't know if like these teams are representing the city they're in and like they're living in LA, or like they're actually living in the cities that they're representing. I don't know. Because it seems like they're just a drive away from the stadium, unless I don't fucking know. But anyways, get back to the channel. I think he definitely has, like, his perspective is by far his perspective and his connections are by far the strongest things he has to his channel. I think the one major thing that he can improve upon is his presentation, because I don't think he wants to be like, you know, the professional Overwatch League caster or anything like that, but I think he could put a lot more quality into, for example, he has like every now and then he'll have a video of just like him talking to his webcam, where it's not necessary to really do that. You know, take it from me, where I've toyed around with this a lot, whereas if you're talking about like Overwatch, for example, it's probably best to just have Overwatch on the screen. You know, you don't have to show yourself talking, especially because I even saw in that exact video, it didn't seem that bad, aside from like every now and then he'll get caught up and reread the same sentence, and it's like almost off-putting because like, whoa, deja vu, because he just, you know, immediately goes back into rereading that. So I think like a little bit of pre-recording and just putting it over top footage of like, you know, random. It doesn't even have to be the gameplay that he's talking about, although that could definitely be a plus because the footage is very easy to get if he's talking about like this game or that game. I noticed like before the preseason actually started, he was talking about how Boston Uprising, this is actually how I found him, would be one of the top tier teams, and they're definitely not, but he, his reasoning was pretty solid, because there are a lot of players that perform really, really, really well in the ladder in Korea, let alone, I think he was talking about like Gamsu and Neko and stuff, which are particular people that I think have been underperforming in Boston Uprising because they're like the first to die every single time. But that's a rant for another day. But I think taking a little bit of extra time for the videos where he's doing a lot of analysis, he could really work to improve the quality of his stuff. Not even like the audio quality, just like the presentation quality. Because if you're talking about like, the Seoul Dynasty versus the, Dallas Fuel, and you're showing a game of like San Francisco versus Houston, it doesn't really add up. It's like it is Overwatch footage and it's from possibly the same day, but it's probably best to have like the particular match that you're talking about, as well as if you're talking about a specific point, on Junkertown, you probably want to have that Junkertown match playing so that people can at least understand a little bit in the background, even if you're not doing a lot of editing, just getting that particular video to pop in your content would be best. It's just a little bit of organization and a little bit of preparation for that sort of stuff, I think goes a long way, as opposed to like, if there are videos where you're doing like an interview or something, you don't have to have Overwatch gameplay in the background. But if you're talking about the game itself and there's no need to, then it's really just best to have like the game footage, because unless you're super comfortable in front of the camera, which I can tell, KINGmykL isn't necessarily, especially, sorry, my phone, especially because I have it right underneath my mic so I can see it. Where was I? Right. Especially because, like, in one of the videos I saw where, he was talking about, like, I think he was talking about, like, his relationship with, like, Baby Bay, who's one of the better players in San Francisco Shock, who, like, really brought it to the preseason. And he played in, like, Congarda and stuff, so they know each other really well. And he was talking, with the webcam or with his, whatever he was using to record himself, but he was looking at the monitor. That's something that even, like, I have to get used to, because you'll see in a few days in the year-end vlog, I even do that. I look off to the side a little bit because I have my script. That's something that I have to work on. But I don't think that makes my criticism any less invalid. And what was the last thing? I had, like, one last major point. It's like, I almost had it. It's like, right, and more recently, he made, like, a video, I think, when XQC got banned for 3 days for, like, throwing a match off stream, stuff like that. He'll go into, like, videos like, this or Defran or this or that, and they're very interesting because, again, his perspective and all that, having actually, like, played against them. But I think if you're going to do a video about particularly, like, why, or what was the more recent video, like, is Defran good enough to still be in the pro scene if he wanted to? And, like, the conclusion was yes, but there was a lot of, like, convoluted storytelling in there. And again, it is interesting, but if it takes you that long to answer the question proposed in the title, people might lose interest. Of course, I watched the whole way through because I just like the videos in general. But I think that is something that could lose a lot of people's interest in general. It's like, oh, well, I remember this and that. It felt a little bit disorganized in terms of just, like, going off the cuff, where I think that sort of thing really needs a script. Take it from me, I work best scripted, as opposed to these podcasts that aren't scripted, but podcast. It's kind of hard to script a 40-minute podcast. Whereas, scripting a 20-minute analysis video, or, for my series, like Paradoxical Ramblings, I think is much better because the final product comes out much more organized and coherent. And I think for those kinds of videos where it's like, is Defran good enough? It's like, it's fine to share those stories, but, script them a little bit so that it feels a little bit more concise, I guess, is my final point on that. Do you have anything else you want to say, John? Or?
Not really.
Yeah. I'll have to make sure that someday in the future, if John happens to have a channel, so that he can gush about, like, this or that. Because obviously this one I found myself, because the Boston Uprising video for the preseason. Anyways, let's move on to the last segment, unless we have brief rambling section, but we've been going long enough. Sorry, text. Right, so the last section is the where are they now. So originally, way back in the second episode of the podcast, way back in September of 2015, we talked about something that actually got some coverage recently from Jim Sterling. And I remember, so basically, long story short, we talked about this company at the time that was relatively new and starting to come out, working with a lot of mobile game developers, called Scientific Revenue. Any of you who watch the Jimquisition regularly, like myself, know that Jim Sterling made an entire Jimquisition on Scientific Revenue, basically bashing them. And I don't necessarily know if they deserve the bashing. Then again, it's his opinion. He can have whatever opinion he wants. And he definitely made some fair points, but I think he was also went a little bit too hard in on them. Basically, Scientific Revenue nowadays works with a lot of the larger companies, even like, I believe they worked with like EA and Ubisoft, to figure out in terms of like microtransactions, what kind of people based off of their habits in game, as well as like in this, whatever system that they can look at, these developers presents like, oh look, there's a sale on loot boxes to someone who might be more susceptible to buying a loot box. So that's basically where the whole like whale, minnow, shark thing was. I forget the exact, I know it was like whale, minnow, and something else in between in terms of how much they'll actually spend. Or maybe it's like whale, minnow, and it's like nothing because people like you and me who don't buy anything at all. And the premise of the Jimquisition is basically to say like, fuck these predatory behaviors, blah 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 blah. And I think he definitely had a fair point, but I also think blaming the company on that is a little bit harsh. Like, yeah, I think saying predatory is a little bit much, personally. Granted, full disclosure, I come from, an animal science background where I took many classes taking the insider look of, like, the agricultural industry, so I'm sort of programmed to look at, like, the industry, the company's perspective as well. Whereas it's a little bit harder to take the perspective of the consumer, I guess, although this time around I am the consumer in terms of video games. Although I'm a bit more stubborn than the average person, because I refuse to buy anything microtransactions-wise. Like Hearthstone, when I played that for like a year, I never bought a card back ever. I've never bought a Overwatch loot box, anything like that. So, I will never do that. But I think, and going back to the point, like way early on in the first article we talked about 30 minutes ago, was basically it's really up to the consumer. If they have a lack of control or a gambling addiction or something like that, that's really their problem. That's something that they have to deal with themselves. It's not the company's fault, and I don't think it's arguable whether it's immoral. I think it probably is closer to the immoral side if they're trying to prey on those kind of people with like borderline predatory behaviors, but it's not illegal, it's just shady. And I don't think it really should be illegal, because then you sort of begin to limit like how companies can make money and blah 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 blah. That gets into a whole Big Brother's watching kind of thing. Although then again, with this sort of thing, you could also argue that I'm trying to take the fair position of like, I obviously have my opinion, but I also understand the other side's opinion, where I don't think that anything that Scientific Revenue is doing is wrong, per se. It definitely can be construed as shady, but they're just trying to make, a buck. They're a marketing company. I remember in the Jimquisition, Jim prominently displayed the trailer that you could actually find for Scientific Revenue on YouTube, I believe, as well as their website, which will all be linked in the description below. And basically he was like going to town on it, like, wow, how can you say this? How can you say that? And it's like, to me, it was very obvious why they were saying that in their video. They were saying a lot of things that, if you said it to the consumer, it would be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But they weren't talking to the consumer. The only reason that that video probably was ever watched by the consumer was because Jim made a Jimquisition on it, as opposed to what they were doing were talking to the companies and talking to the marketing departments. The marketing departments don't give a shit about the consumer, and that's not abnormal. Every single company in the world is like that. That's their job, isn't to worry about the consumer, it's to worry about internal stuff. So, while I do agree that, from a consumer's perspective, their Scientific Revenue's trailer or commercial or whatever to companies out there can seem just completely batshit crazy. It's not really. When you could take a step back, and to Jim's credit, he absolutely acknowledged that, but then he also stood by his ground saying, this is predatory as fuck, I don't like it, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's fair. He's absolutely allowed to have that opinion, and it's hard to argue with it because from his perspective, yes, it absolutely seems wrong. But I've been rambling on enough. Do you have anything to to add to this, John, before I go more?
Honestly, just like I feel like the cow discussing the efficiency of the slaughterhouse.
Yeah. And
hearing the farmer describing it about how many more cows it can get 20 to 40% more cows in the same amount of time.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah, well, maybe shit.
I'm just gonna go over to the other side of the pasture.
Yeah.
And yeah, it, on purpose or not, it does kind of prey on a lot of those gambling tendencies.
Oh, it's absolutely on purpose, but at the same time, it's just standard business practice, and that does sort of fall into the fallacy of like, well, it's always been the case, so it's okay, and that's not necessarily true, but it's also not illegal, nor do I think it should be. So I think it's fair game to call companies out on this, and if you oppose this that much, don't support them, but, personally for me, I don't care. As long as, like I said before, as long as it doesn't affect the actual gameplay experience, as long as it's just cosmetic, which I know Jim Sterling hates, which I doubt he'll ever watch this. Watch, we get a fucking comment like, you fucking... if he watches 40 minutes into this shit. But all jokes aside, I think it really depends on the individual who's looking at the company. If they're using if they don't like what Scientific Revenue is doing and they don't want to support anyone hiring Scientific Revenue for their research, then by all means don't support that company, whether it be Activision Blizzard or this or that. Personally, I don't care, but that's just my opinion. I think that's really what this argument falls down into, which is I think one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss this, because you can have any amount of opinion and you're not really wrong.
The other thing about like the whole dynamic pricing thing is, like, I don't know, if I went to the grocery store and I could buy like a 1 liter bottle of soda for like $1.50, and then you see the next guy come in and it only costs $1 for him, it would just, something would just feel off about that.
Yeah, that's a little bit misleading, because that's not actually what it is, because that is illegal. Technically, there are loopholes around that, but it's a little bit more roundabout. What that generally is it looks at what people would be willing to purchase and then changes the price based off of that. So they're not actually like, okay, this person pays $1, but you pay $3. That's actually illegal, because that can be considered discrimination.
Right.
But yeah, I think that was another thing that I think Jim might have gotten wrong in his Jimquisition, because the way I'm sure he knows that, but the way he made it sound to people who don't know might have thought that, and I think some people in the comments thought that, so it's like, it's hard to say. Obviously, he's very passionate about that argument, but yeah, that you can't do that. That's something that companies know damn well that they can't do, so that's not something to worry about. But in terms of like, I've seen the analysis before, obviously, because they do the same analysis market-wise in agriculture, which my degree is in, where it boils down to 98% of people would be willing to pay for a carrot for $1 per carrot, but 90% of people would be willing to pay $5 per carrot. So you're willing to sacrifice that 8% of people in order to raise the price by 500%. That's really what it is, and it's a lot of statistics. It's very convoluted. If you ever get into economics, that's basically it. That's part of it anyways. That's a major topic. And again, it feels like almost scummy, but it may be immoral depending on who you ask, but it's not illegal.
Yeah.
So I don't think... So basically, Unless do you have anything else to say?
Not really. This article brings up airline pricing, and that's kind of another whole other thing.
Oh yeah, there's this article brings up a lot of economics and stuff, but basically, the one takeaway from this is that Scientific Revenue 2 years ago went from this small company that was working with mobile developers to this year, which they got so prolific in the game sphere that they got a fucking Jimquisition episode all to themselves. Mm-hmm. Good or bad, they earned it.
Yeah.
And that's all I really have. We've actually been going for 45 minutes, and my dad has been texting me that I need to get ready to go because right. I'm going to hang out with my brother and dad for a while. So that's all I really have, unless you have anything else to say. I don't have anything to ramble about. This actually worked really well. If we could have at least like 2 of these extra format editions every single time, we might not even have to do the rambling section unless there's something we really want to talk about, because that's sort of the way I'd like to lean towards. Because the rambling section is nice if we want to, but if we don't want to, I don't want it to just pad time. But yeah, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching the Pixelated Sheep podcast, counting Pixelated Sheep podcast, whatever. If you enjoyed it, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more like it, maybe even subscribe. Links to all the references will be in the description below. There won't be a direct link to the Jimquisition because the article about this, the more recent article about Scientific Revenue, has like links to a bunch of different Jimquisitions that he touches on this and that, because he did the one full episode in Scientific Revenue, but he had a few others where he referenced this and that. So that'll all be... It's easier to just put the link to the article that's more or less all-encompassing, and it's not like you're stealing a view from Jim because you're still watching his video through YouTube embedded into their website, so that's nice. Links to my social media and whatnot are in the description below as well as John's right above mine. Have any closing statements, John?
No.
Well, that's all the time we've got for today, so until next time, don't die.